Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
Hey, it's me, Egbert. E-G-G-B-U-R-T. Check out my website at egbert.com. Now it's back to those two dudes who told me they would bring in big ratings. They better are their history. Here are Brad and John.
And if there's anything we don't want to be right now is history, right, John?
Absolutely not. We are the present and the future.
Right. This is the B and J Show. Brad and John. Let me try it one more time. bjshow.co. Did I get that right?
You did. You're the one that organized the domain name, and you're the one that set everything up, and you got it right.
I'm going to have to put that right here in front of me. One of my favorite movies, and there's all these little subtle things in this movie. One of my favorite movies is called Almost Famous. Have you ever seen Almost Famous before?
You're going to kill me, Brad. I have not.
Okay, you need to go see the movie. You would enjoy them. Well, maybe you wouldn't. It's essentially
Is it a rom-com?
Well, yeah, it is. But you know who Cameron Crowe is? You know who Cameron Crowe is?
Yeah, I do know who Cameron Crowe is.
Okay, this is semi-autobiographical because I don't know if you know this or not. When Cameron Crowe was in his teens, he got a job with Rolling Stone magazine, and he was like touring with groups like I think he toured with Led Zeppelin and things like that. Okay, so this is a story about a young kid at the time. I think he was 15 or 16, who essentially talked his way with Rolling Stone magazine into going on the road with a fictitious group called Stillwater and following them around the country. And it's there's some classic moments of this movie, and what's interesting is it is so true to what to form, and it's got some great performances. The guy who I think absolutely positively steals the movie, and quite honestly, I think every movie I've ever seen the guy in steals the movie, and it's so sad he killed himself. Is Philip Seymour Hoffman? Is that his name?
Yeah.
Okay.
PSH.
And what I was getting to, there's a classic scene in this movie where, and what's really interesting is because Cameron Crowe at the time was married to one of the Hart sisters, Ann and Mary Wilson. I think it was Ann Wilson. You know I'm talking about, Hart, the group?
From the band Hart?
Yeah, the band. There's two sisters, Ann and Mary Hart, Ann and Mary Wilson, okay? And she was good friends with Peter Frampton. You know who Peter Frampton is, right?
Oh, yeah. Wasn't he a big pothead?
I know he was the guy. Frampton Comes Alive, the big live album. Does this predate you, John?
Yeah, but wasn't he he was kind of a counterculture guy, like a hippie guy, wasn't he?
Aren't they all from that era?
Yeah, I guess so. I associate it with a Mitch Hedberg joke about smoking marijuana, so that's why I said that. But go ahead.
Back in the day, I was the only guy who didn't smoke dope. What are you talking about? Okay,
there you go.
So,
and today, you and I are the only two that don't smoke dope.
Yes,
go ahead.
So the classic scene is, and what's interesting, they hired Peter Frampton to choreograph the concert scenes. So in other words, he said, okay, this is the way it's got to be.
Okay.
So there's a backstage shot of the group, and on one of the monitor speakers, which is, on the ground, on the stage in front of the musicians, they don't use them anymore because everybody uses the in-ear headsets. But on the back of one of the monitor speakers, so only the performers can see what it says, it's got, in big letters, Wichita. So the idea being is...
Oh, I've seen this clip, Brad.
Yes. The guys would say, hey, we love you, Wichita, because the idea being is they're on the road and they're so stoned out of their minds for the most part that they don't know where they're at. They just get up on stage. And matter of fact, I think that's happened here in St. Louis a few times where the guys have gotten on stage, hey, I love you, Chicago. Hey, you're in St. Louis.
Absolutely not. Hey, Green Bay.
Right, they're not in Green Bay. They're not in Green Bay. So that's one of the subtle little things, because of the fact that a friend of mine who used to work for Contemporary Productions told the story that a lot of these groups, and at the time these were groups now that we consider to be like, huge artists that you hear all day long, like on KC 95 and things like that, that he said that when they had interactions with the groups, some of these guys didn't know what planet they were on. You know what I mean? They were, it wasn't what city they were in. It was what planet they were on. And, it's sort of interesting because it's sad when you have someone who has an addiction that so much takes over their life. But I've several friends of mine who are alcoholics, and that sounds weird that I say that. And I'm always fascinated.
We all do, Brad. Whether we know it or not,
right,
we know people that are alcoholics.
Probably
right.
so. And my one friend always referred to the fact that when he talked about his alcoholic friends, that they're functional alcoholics.
So they hold a job, they have a family. They can go to the supermarket and buy groceries.
Right. And they can go out to lunch and slam down a couple fingers of Jack Daniels and go back into work, and nobody knows any difference. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because,
they do a great job hiding it and acting normal.
But their body has gotten so acclimated to the alcohol that they can, for the most part, function. And I'm going, wow, that's kind of scary. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay, so what were we gonna talk about? Which I got.
Oh, Will Scharf.
Okay, Will Scharf. Okay, he was. Okay, tell me the story. I heard it before. He met Trump at like an event or something, wasn't it?
Well, as he explained it yesterday, and the timestamp was on my website today, but he mentioned, and you know what, Brad, I think this could be a possible, as you enter the 19th stage of your career, this could be a model for you. But he said, he had done a lot of writing about Trump's cases and things like that, and members of the Trump team. Through that, he got to know members of the Trump team. Now, remember, Will Scharf came into this whole arena with quite a pedigree. He went to Princeton. He got his law degree from Harvard. So it's not like he didn't know anybody. So he obviously knew folks in a lot of these circles. But by establishing himself as, and I'm going to use a corporate term here, Brad, as an SME, a subject matter expert, by establishing himself as an SME on some of these presidential and federal type cases, folks from the Trump team, as he explains it, had reached out to him. And then, according to Will, the president himself wanted to talk to Will about it. And the highlight of the interview, I think, is that Will talks about how an editorial cartoon, one of these courtroom sketch artists, I started to call it an editorial cartoonist, a courtroom sketch artist drew a picture of him. And Will, who has a great self-deprecating sense of humor, posted it on his Instagram. And Will's like, well, they got the receding hairline right, but it looks like they added about 100 pounds.
Well,
and Annie Fry pointed out that in the courtroom sketch, Trump is leaning into Will and looking at Will and talking to Will. And so take a step back here, Brad. In a Republican primary, you don't want nothing can top being pictured or depicted next to Donald Trump.
So, in other words, you say it's all positive, correct?
Absolutely.
Right.
It doesn't matter if they drew Will completely bald and 400 pounds. Like, he gets the rub from being by Donald Trump.
Well, okay. Yesterday, I heard this live where Trump is still fighting this case in New York where Letitia James, the attorney general who campaigned on, literally, you can go back and find commercials and speeches where she comes out and she says, and if I'm elected attorney general, I will throw Donald Trump in jail.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm going like, okay. He came out and did a press conference at one of his buildings on purpose. He testified, I guess, that was yesterday, I guess it was. He testified in the morning, and he did a press conference, which, by the way, the judge chastised him because the judge had a gag order on him. And if you know the background of this crazy case he's involved in New York right now, if you would take AOC or, Joe Biden or Kamala Harris and inject them with sodium pentothal where they had to tell the truth, even they would say that this case against Trump in New York is just bogus BS.
Right.
And it's an ordinance which has never been our state law, which has never been enforced. And essentially, it's like a consumer protection ordinance. And what it is they're claiming that Donald Trump, essentially overvalued all his property and essentially screwed the banks and screwed the lenders and things like that.
Which would be considered fraud.
But the problem is none of the banks are complaining. And the banks are saying, hey, man, we wish we had more customers like him.
You mentioned that last week or like the week before.
Right.
Yeah, the banks have no issue with it.
The banks have no issue with it. And matter of fact, what's interesting about this is if you've ever bought any real estate, and matter of fact, if we get a real estate edge in on here, I have guy, Mark, Mike Swearingen Jim.
Is he part of the Ellis
No.
Oh,
He's much better than them.
And Mike wasn't he a podcast guest, or am I making that up?
Yes, he was a podcast guest.
Yeah,
yes. Okay. Yeah. And like, for example, the thing is that, like, if you go to somebody's house and like he talks about this all the time, that he would go to somebody's house that they want to list their house. And he would say, well, what do you think your house is worth? Well, it's worth $900,000. And he would say, maybe about $450, maybe $500 for a portion.
Yeah.
Okay. The idea being is, before the bank's going to lend any money, they're not going to let the homeowner come in and say, yeah, my house is worth $900,000.
That would be the definition of self-dealing.
They're going to have an appraiser come out and say the house is worth X. And what's interesting is, from a comms guy perspective, that there's all these, like, for example, anytime you would give out in your comms day, I don't know if you were the person to doing this, but when the Monsanto stock report would come out, where they would give the official, here's how Monsanto stock's
Here's
done.
Our EBITDA. Here's our, yep.
Right. For example, you just mentioned EBITDA, right? Isn't it? Mm-hmm. Did you call it EBITDA, or how did you pronounce it?
Yeah, EBITDA.
EBITDA, which essentially stands for, go ahead and you know right off the top of your head.
Interest before is it before tax deductions? Interest before earnings before interest. The depreciation is in there somewhere.
Right. Essentially, what it is it's like.
Hold on.
You're gonna look it up. It's earnings before interest.
Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization.
Right.
So amortization is how much that it depreciates or just goes away, just vaporizes.
And it almost always, the report ends with the statement that these are forward-looking numbers, right? If they're saying, like, next quarter we're going to do $33 billion.
And they can't be held accountable.
Right. And essentially you throw the disclaimer in there that you're essentially saying, hey, you know what? We put our finger in the air and we said the wind was blowing from the west, and so we're saying that next quarter the wind's going to blow from the east, but yet if you come back and say, well, last quarter we said, hey, these are forward-looking numbers.
Yes, exactly.
That's what I read. I read the actual disclaimer that Trump put on all of his properties when they went to the bank, and they're essentially saying, hey, here's blah, 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 blah. And then, see, the other crazy thing about it is he gets into a fight with the judge in the case, and the judge tells him, and I'm not making this up, the judge says, you've got Mar-a-Lago, tremendously overvalued. That's only worth $18 million, okay? There's a story I read the other day that somebody bought 2 acres of undeveloped land in Palm Beach, where Mar-a-Lago is and all the other fancy people is, 2 acres for like $100 million.
Yeah.
Okay, and Mar-a-Lago, if you know the history, Mar-a-Lago was built by one of the big industrialists. I can't remember who it was, and Trump bought it.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah.
I've been to West Palm.
Well, even to the point where there's art. I read all this. I go down these rabbit holes. Okay, there's this crazy story about Trump's sister, who was a judge. Did you know that she was a judge, a federal judge? Did you know that?
I don't remember that.
Yeah, she was a federal judge. She retired. She bought a house down the street. I think it might even be across the street from Mar-a-Lago. And the Trump organization bought it from her, I think when she was getting up there in years. And she knew that, I think she had some terminal disease, and she knew her life was not going to be too much longer. They bought the property from her, and just the property, which is only like it's like 8,200 square foot. They call it a mansion, but it's 8,200 square feet. It's like nothing like Mar-a-Lago, okay? Right. It's on the market right now for $59 million. Yeah. So the judge said that the entire Mar-a-Lago is worth $18 million, which is like, that's like, come on.
Yeah.
That would be like, it's to the point where I think to myself, man, I wish I had those kind of problems. You know what my kind of problem is?
What's that? How much baling wire we can use to attach some of the wires?
No, I get emails from Carvana because one time I took my car in. I got one the other day. I swear to God, I should show you. This is funny. I went to one time, my one car there, maybe Carvana, or no, it was either Carvana or it was, what's the other big one? CarMax. No, it was CarMax.
Oh, CarMax. Okay.
I went to CarMax and had the guy evaluate my car that I'm driving today. And I got an email in the mail just the other day, or email that said, it says, good news, Brad, your car has increased in value. Okay, you ready for this?
Yeah,
and
I'm ready.
You open up the email and says, hey, Brad, you recently stopped by and had your car appraised at the CarMax in St. Peter's, and we gave you the evaluation of X. I won't say what it was, but now we're willing to pay $400 for your car.
You're joking me. That's fantastic.
Yeah, $400 for your car. So that's
in this era when you look at luxury car sales, you look at new car sales, that's why companies like, hey, by the way, this is not financial advice, and if you want that, you should go to Mike McGee at Edward Jones.
That's right.
But that's why stocks like AutoZone, as we continue to enter this down market, folks are not buying new cars. Folks are going to spend a little bit more on car repair.
But the interesting part of that is the used car market is not doing well as well either. It's a matter of fact, and Carvana. There's a whole interesting story about Carvana. Carvana stock is in the toilet, but there's a whole crazy story about that. Matter of fact, it's one of these. Matter of fact, all these useless tidbits of knowledge I have on the tip of my head. You know the guy that started LifeLock. You know the theft identity thing. Mm-hmm. Did you know he was an ex-con?
No, I didn't know that. Wow. Well, that's, you know what, that should make him an expert on criminal enterprise.
The guys in jail are the ones. If you think you know how to take care of your identity, talk to the guys in jail who got nailed for forging checks and stuff like. It's like the guy who was the guy that became the focus of the movie. With Leonardo DiCaprio, you know who the guy?
God, what was his name? The real reclusive guy. Gosh,
well, no,
we could Google it.
No. He used to go and do talk shows all the time, and I think at one point in time he actually worked for the FBI for fraud detection and things like that. You know,
the guy that pretended to be a pilot, not
yes. He forged checks and all sorts of crazy
stuff.
Catch Me
If You Can.
Yes,
was the name
Catch
of it.
Me If You Can. Yes, I can't remember the guy's.
Catch Me If You Can. Wow, Brad, that movie is 22 years old.
God, hard to believe. And I've never.
Can you believe that?
I've never seen it.
I've never seen it either.
Okay, we have to take a break.
By Frank Abagnale.
That's right, Frank Abagnale. Yes.
I've never seen it.
Yeah, interesting. He used to be a talk show host guest all the time. I used to see him on all the talk shows. When that movie came out, he was on Jay Leno, and he was here, and he was there.
Oh,
and
wow.
A very engaging guy, and you could sort of believe, I could believe this guy could walk into a room and tell everybody that he was, a Secret Service agent for the president, and
people would believe
right?
it. Yeah.
People go, oh, really? What's he like? Oh, he's a great guy.
If you sell it right,
Right.